this was just, I was going to put up this visual. I mean, first off, guys, it's really nice to talk to you. I'm really excited to share my perspective on the dearMoon project, on the work that I'm doing. And my perspective is unique. You know, I stumbled upon this kind of golden ticket, once in a lifetime opportunity to take the space mission, not through a traditional process, through NASA or through other means, but through applying online, you know, through one of these space missions that you're hearing about of people who privately fund a space flight, kind of have some agency over how it's conducted and who they choose. And I'll tell you all about the dearMoon mission. The lack of spoiler I have is that I don't know anything really about Starship, about the launch timelines, about the trajectory of all of this in a technical way or dates or training any more than the public does. But what I think is unique about my story so far in this whole thing is being someone who went through a civilian selection process with one of these flights and sort of just the life journey that brought me through filmmaking and brought me to this moment. And I think kind of more universally, the kinds of stories like ours with this dearMoon mission are the kinds where you're going to see more and more over these coming years, almost this democratization of who ends up going to space. And so for us, we're an all artist crew. It's 8 different artists and creatives from around the world. And we'll be doing a lunar orbit of a mission that takes about 7 days, 3 days each way. And we're going to take Starship with SpaceX. And our mission is sponsored, and he'll be with us, an entrepreneur and billionaire named Yusaku Maezawa. And so what I kind of just wanted to start with is I have a reel of my work. It's 4.5, 5 minutes long. I'm 29 now, and since college, graduating around when I was 22, I've been very fortunate to get to travel all around the world and film documentaries, commercial projects, and follow what turned into kind of my passion and my dream of telling human stories in nature and capturing the natural world. And so I think that just seeing that little snippet of some of the stuff I do will be a really nice backdrop for me to talk to you more about my story and what led me into the dearMoon mission. And at the end of this, if you have any burning questions while I'm chatting, you're welcome to enter into the Zoom link or just interrupt me. But also at the end, we're going to have some time to talk too, and I'll answer whatever you want as much as I can. So I'm going to stop my share for a second, and then we'll go to, let's see here. We'll go to that reel, Chris, if you don't mind. I'm going to play it for a second. You give me a thumbs up if it sounds.
We already have a better.
I encourage people to take this opportunity to be humbled before this living classroom that we have entrusted to us. Our word for God is a verb, living in unity.
I don't know what it is about the redwoods. They're so old and they've seen so much and, you know, survived so much. It makes me feel like I can survive. Fear just shouldn't inhibit you from doing beautiful things.
Job to feel things fiercely. And none of this matters if you can't share it with the people you love.
If we try to understand each other, if we try to de-emphasize those things that divide us, we can achieve some level of peace.
The thing about storytelling, you are the vehicle. A story is entrusting itself to you, and you don't know exactly what it is yet. It's an awesome responsibility.
One could argue that without photography, there wouldn't have been national parks. I try to inspire people to visit those places so that they will care about them. You really have to push your art further and try to do something with lasting power.
We have to be teachers. You have to be aware of protecting nature. It's just a part of us.
When things are that big, it makes you just want to do the things you love.
We are all children of this common mystery.
Let's see here. Can you guys hear me okay still? Perfect. So that's a lot of my work now. I mean, I spent a lot of long, hard hours traveling around the world, operating camera rigs, working on different projects to create all that stuff. And I think it's helpful to see because we'll talk about it, but it's also this perspective I'm trying to bring to the dearMoon mission. And so for me personally, a lot of this started right here as me being a younger guy under night skies at my grandmother's house in Sun Valley, Idaho. I first fell in love with long exposure photography and capturing the night sky through my camera. And these kind of long nights spent wandering under the stars were some of the first instances where I really felt that wonder and connectedness in the natural world. And I think it really planted a lot of seeds for what I ended up wanting to do. And so I originally wanted to be a Hollywood filmmaker. You guys might not know this or might know it, but I grew up in Marlborough in Connecticut, so not far from Hartford. And so I'm Connecticut proud in that way. And I always thought I'd be a Hollywood filmmaker. I was making films for years in high school, doing skateboarding filmmaking, narrative films. I went to NYU Film School, like dead set that was my dream and that was the path I wanted to take. But that all really changed during college, where I took a road trip that really changed the course of my life. So I was in Los Angeles. I was doing a couple of internships at Hollywood studios, thinking that was like the beginning of the rest of my career. But then I started hiking on the evenings and fell in love with nature. And it was really driving home that summer and starting to go to national parks that I connected the dots and realized that this was my passion. You know, I went from being a job to really like heart work, you know, something that I really wanted to do with my life. And I was taking these photographs that for the first time were feeling like kind of real nature photographs or closer to them. And I think what really blew my mind around the stars and around nature was just this idea that it's accessible. You know, if you're able to get into a national park, if you're able to get into a protected landscape or even your backyard, you could see really beautiful stuff. And I'd always thought you needed some big camera crew or knew the exact spots or backpacked 10 or 20 miles to get to things like this. So for me, the night that really crystallizes in the Grand Canyon, I was looking out, seeing these rain clouds and a sunset all the way around the horizon. And the real moment for me was seeing the Milky Way, and it was during the Perseid meteor shower. So they were shooting stars and meteors going through it every, minute or seconds, and then lightning kind of cracking through the bottom. And it was this big culminating moment that just felt like magic. I mark it as the first time that I was in the natural world and just said, this is magic. Like, this is beyond belief what we're seeing. And that night really inspired me, instead of narrative films, to want to create documentaries and tell human stories in nature. I think the realization was that just being in a park for one day or one trip, or being under one night sky, or even in one planetarium, is enough to inspire someone to pursue a lifetime of connecting with the natural world and studying it. So kind of that idea of nature as a human story. So I got out of college, I took out a loan, and got my first kind of documentary cinema camera. And my dream for it was to travel the world making documentaries and trying to tell those stories. And I was very lucky that I graduated with some friends that founded a film production company. I started doing a lot of work with them. I started sending cold emails and cold messages and taking every opportunity I could to travel, from the salt flats of Utah to an operating room in Tanzania, and just getting to hone my skills and see the way that people interact with the world. One of the projects I did that I was really proud of was for the Bill Nye the Science Guy documentary on Netflix. It's called Bill Nye Science Guy, and I actually went out with him and the two directors that you see there to help film for a scene of his film. And it was all about this ice core drilling base where they're drilling for ice cores out in the middle of Greenland, 200 miles from civilization. And based on the depth that you're drilling, you can date, where that ice core came from based on how deep you're pulling it up from the ground. And therefore, you're able to kind of analyze the ancient atmospheres trapped in that ice core. And it was really cool. I spent 10 days with Bill Nye. We were bunkmates. We were both on top bunks while the directors were on bottom bunks. And as just a young filmmaker and space nerd and nature nerd, it was a total dream to get to work on something like that. So photo I shot of Bill became the cover of the movie, which was really cool. And then I think just through my travels after that and photographing and making films, time and time again, I just kept being reminded of that wonder of the natural world and just how special it was that we had the chance to live on this planet. And it made me really want to encourage more people to connect with nature. And I think my journey through all this stuff, and even up to now, because it's still very early in that journey, is knowing what's going to be my message and what's been my personal message. But what have I been taught? What do I have to share through this dearMoon mission that we're undergoing? And so kind of after college, my big passion project, and it turned into my white whale, was making a feature-length documentary about national parks. And so I was just kind of dreaming up what would be the most difficult and the biggest challenge I could take on. And since the national parks had really inspired me as a filmmaker and inspired me to want to make documentaries, I thought about, what if I told human stories in the national parks? Do a whole summer after college for 3 months, travel through as many parks as possible, all to tell the human stories of people living within them. And so, let me see. So me and my friend Anthony set out. Anthony was not a filmmaker at all. He was an educator and at the time studying economics in college. But when he said I wanted to do this national parks journey, he said, let's do it. I'll support you in any way I can, and we'll go and we'll hit the road and just try to make this happen. And so that's what we did. I had graduated college and I was working with the National Geographic Channel in their offices in New York. And in some ways it was a really cool job. And I was assisting development and production. But at the same time, I really wanted to be out on the road and traveling and meeting people and do that thing I'd always dreamed of. And so the long story short is, throughout this time, these past years making all these other films, I've been working on this national parks project. We did this original summer and spent 3 months traveling across parks with the idea of meeting people in different parks and telling their stories. And I directed, shot, and edited the film. It's a feature-length documentary. And it took 7 years to finish the final film because of the editing, picking up footage and filming more over the years. But it became this real odyssey that we're really proud of telling these human stories in the parks. So this is a little internal trailer we have. It's very rough, but just so you guys get an idea of this film. And I promise all this stuff is leading to the space thing too. So I'll show you just this little teaser of our parks film. This has been a very long journey that completely changed the way I saw the national parks.
I encourage people to take this opportunity to be humbled before this living classroom that we have entrusted to us.
Every national park you go to is a different world.
This park has stories, but here's the thing. The story's not done yet.
I started making films when I was 12. I'd always wanted to be a Hollywood filmmaker. All that changed when I took a road trip through the US national parks.
I don't think either of us had any premonitions that we were going to fall in love with the natural world on that trip.
Our trip began with a dream of trying to see as many national parks as we could, but it ended in a place I could have never expected. We found that we were becoming inspired by people just as much as the landscapes themselves. We were learning so much more about these parks through the people we were meeting along the way.
I'm Acadia National Park's trails foreman. It is amazing to know that you're part of a crew that's done this work and all these people are enjoying it.
The national park here in Glacier is just over 100 years old, whereas our Blackfeet Indian people have been here for well over 13,000 years.
There was a lot of fear going in because a lot of people told me I shouldn't be doing it. I shouldn't be alone in the woods as a girl. Fear just shouldn't inhibit you from doing beautiful things.
As a photographer, I try to inspire people to visit those places. One could argue that without photography, there wouldn't have been national parks.
We found that this story of the parks is so much bigger than us. The national parks are part of our human story. They preserve these shared experiences we have within them. Exploring that was our greatest adventure. So yeah, so that's the National Parks film. And I'm very proud of it. We've been screening last year. We did like 15 or 20 film festivals with the film. This year we've done 3 or 4, and we have a very, very special screening tomorrow night. That's technically our New York premiere at a place called the Explorers Club here in New York. And I share all this stuff because I think that as we get into this this moon story and the space story, as an artist personally and a filmmaker, that kind of path and that vision for work and the way I want to tell stories is kind of an inseparable part of the whole thing. You know, like I think when you look at a traditional journey of a NASA astronaut going in flight school and having these different experiences that were very formative for us artists, that's these walks of life. And so this just happens to be mine. And so for the moon story, so it's early 2021. I see a news article online that a Japanese billionaire wants 8 people to come with him on the first civilian mission around the moon with SpaceX. Here's what it's like to apply. And I had never, if I'd done anything differently in my entire life leading to that moment, I would have never seen the news article. So I could have gotten a coffee or not. I could have done just about anything, and I would have never seen this article. And I never even thought I would ever have the chance to go to space. You know, it felt so far off and so impossible to even dream about that. Even I've always tried to be a big dreamer, but even my biggest dreams, I don't think could encompass the idea of going to space. But I put in my name. I put in some photos of myself and applied online. This was the kind of thing they had on the banner of their website. And I said, man, this seems really cool, but also like, I don't even know if this is real. Like, what an impossible and crazy opportunity. But for me personally, I was first connected to this idea of our kind of modern era in spaceflight during the pandemic a year before in 2020. This is Bob and Doug, you know, SpaceX launching, I think it was their first manned flight up to the ISS. And I was at Cape Canaveral in Florida. I was staying with my girlfriend's family in Orlando. And I didn't even know you could just go to Cape Canaveral and see a rocket launch. And nowadays you can go, 2, 3 times a week just about and see a rocket go up. And so we went with the RV with my girlfriend's family, and we waited and waited, and then the launch was scrubbed. And so we went back 3 days later and sat on top and finally saw them rocket off to the ISS. And it was during the pandemic such a hard time. The first moment of inspiration I felt like an evolution of humanity moving forward and something really beautiful and shared happening. And so as I was applying for this mission, I think I was really thinking of that. I took this photo and made this composite photo out of the whole thing. And so I think some of this, and maybe all of this, is stuff you guys know, but this era of spaceflight we're in is remarkable. You have all these different rocket companies emerging. We're on this new pathway to the moon and going off to Mars. And we're starting to see a space industry boom alongside just this new era of human exploration and what it means to get up there. And we're not just expanding the idea of humans going around the moon or considering lunar bases, but I've talked to folks that are working on startups that are thinking of, once we get out there and once we get up into zero gravity and into space, what's then the next step once that becomes relatively easy and comfortable? And so people are researching, medicines and how to even consider growing things like organs and artificial tissues in zero gravity, and saying, not just, spiritually or scientifically, what are we going to learn, but using this new, space for us to be in, how are we going to be able to rethink the way we do a lot of this stuff here on Earth? So of the rockets of the world, I mean, Starship is massive. In the bottom right there, I think it's 400 feet tall. It's about the size of the largest redwood tree on Earth. And seeing Starship in person is an unbelievable experience. If you guys want to add something to your space bucket list or travel list, I definitely recommend taking a visit to Starbase. SpaceX's kind of Starship building base down in Boca Chica Beach, Texas. You can get really close and see right over the wall and see Starship kind of looming above you and get a sense for what they're doing down there. And if you go for one of Starship's test launches, once it's getting a little more consistent, I promise it's going to be a really, really cool trip. But there is this idea that we're building kind of the largest rocket ever built to do this. SpaceX eventually would like to put 100 people on Starship for certain kind of jumps, as well as use it to take us to the moon and to Mars. And with our dearMoon mission, what's very cool is that MZ, the entrepreneur who's paying for the whole thing and sponsored it, the money he's putting in towards developing Starship for this goes towards that material cost of SpaceX's development, where Starship's also in line to be used for the Artemis 3 moon landing, NASA's next landing that'll put the first woman and first person of color on the moon. So it's very cool that we're part of this pipeline. 33 engines. It is an insane, massive sight to stand below them and to think of propelling something of this size up through the atmosphere. Again, it's just in the clouds, and I think very few people understand this kind of era we're in of rocketry and what lies ahead. And so this is the dearMoon original flight plan from some time ago. I can't say if it's been updated. This is all public, but it's this idea of launching from Earth and orbiting around and kind of slingshotting out towards the moon and around the far side. It's another render of Starship looking beautiful and futuristic. And then one potentially of the Artemis 3 moon landing. So for me, during this whole dearMoon process, it was very crazy because I can't speak too much to exactly what the selection process entailed, but I kind of put my name in and just saw, and there would be these days where I'd have no messages in my inbox, and all of a sudden I get a message from dearMoon saying, you're welcome to apply to the next round of the selection processes. And kind of what this looked like, I sent them a portfolio of my work that looks just very much like some of the stuff I've been sending to you guys too. But we did Zoom interviews, and I eventually did a group Zoom interview with them, a medical exam at UCLA Hospital, and then we did a big group Zoom interview as well towards the end of 2021. And so I spent a lot of 2021. I couldn't talk about this publicly. I could tell a few select friends and family, but but kind of in the background of my life, I would be doing these interviews and examinations and even flying out to do interviews for this potential lunar mission. And I wasn't really able to tell a lot of my friends about it at all. But that I applied with kind of this work that you guys are seeing now. And the fairest question I could be asked is why, why are you eventually doing this? And what I told them during that selection process was this idea that as a filmmaker, what I learned personally is that we connect to nature, we connect to science through human stories and the stories of people engaging with this stuff too. And that personally, I felt that we've seen the moon and we've seen the Earth, but what's really unique about the dearMoon mission and this idea of artists and creatives going on a journey and interpreting this all through their mediums is this idea of this personal change, and that we've never seen an entire crew of artists. And these are also highly sensitive people that I think will have really emotional reactions and interpret and talk about this experience in a way that we've never quite seen. And so I said, whether it's me or another filmmaker, please tell the human story of this, the before, the during, the after this journey, and capturing just the change that all of these folks undergo. This is me during my medical exam, massive, massive panel of blood and kind of all sorts of tests, as many as you could possibly think of, for at that moment to certify that my body was in a healthy place and there weren't any disqualifying factors. Before the big group interview we did, I had a chance to get back under the stars and kind of road trip out and get myself in this place. I bought a bunch of pants. You're seeing piecemeal some different moments, but I bought a zillion pants and tried to choose between them. I did the group interview in Texas. It went really well. And then it came down to Thanksgiving of 2021. MZ asked, would you like to do one last Zoom meeting for us to ask some additional questions before we make our final selections? So I logged in. It was just MZ kind of on the other side of the Zoom. And he said, Brenden, would you like to know the results of the dearMoon selection process? And for me, it was this crazy moment. It was kind of my American Idol moment almost, with this long pregnant pause where no matter what he said, my life was about to change one way or the other. And he said, I'd love you to be a part of this mission. Would you want to join me on the dearMoon journey? Just the greatest honor of my life. And apparently 1 million people applied. And my girlfriend caught me on a cell phone video. I'm just beyond, freaking out at the opportunity. And then just a couple months later after our selection, which is a very special opportunity, was MZ offered to fly the crew out and go through Russia. This was before the conflict, to Kazakhstan. MZ took this really cool 8-day journey up to the International Space Station that he trained for months with the Russian cosmonauts, but also different space agencies. And so we had a chance to be flown to Star City in Kazakhstan, the same city that Sputnik launched from, that Yuri Gagarin launched from, and get to witness, this leader of our moon mission actually kind of put his experience and his risk, and his training where his mouth is, in the sense that he was going to go to space. And it was an amazing, amazing experience, where MZ is kind of there, you see in the spacesuit. We saw him in the morning. We saw him through this quarantine pane of glass in a press area. We saw him get on a bus and board a rocket. By 1 p.m., this is us. This is me jumping up and down and some of our crew. And this is slow motion, but we were watching a Soyuz rocket take off into the sky with a guy that we had just seen there that morning. And then by the evening, we were watching him dock with the ISS. And so this is all of us just celebrating and laughing. And for me personally, I think a big question in this dearMoon stuff is, when does it feel real? I don't think until we're on the rocket and actually doing the whole thing will it feel real, but it happens in phases. And so this was one moment that it felt very real, seeing someone in the morning that in the end on a live stream floating into the International Space Station. And another time it felt real was during the Starship test launch that we were at last year, when they did the first test of Starship. We met the high-ups at SpaceX and had a chance to really talk with them about our mission. And so kind of coming back to that first launch, that for me, just as a life lesson, what was very cool was I've come to learn that the people that were operating this first space launch that really inspired me and reignited my passion are the same ones that we've met that are going to be our crew liaisons and team helping us with the dearMoon project. And so it's this really powerful lesson of just you never know what's going to happen in your life and truly what you're seeing. My first interview with the dearMoon thing, we were announced at the end of 2022. I had to keep it secret for a year. I was on the Today Show, which was really crazy. I mean, talk about a first piece of press that makes one very nervous to talk in front of about 1 million people on live TV. But I've become very proud to represent the mission. And we have our dearMoon crew, artists all around the world, a couple of photographers, a choreographer, Korean pop musician, a very famous American DJ and musician named Steve Aoki, Tim Dodd, also the everyday astronaut, who's a big rocket science educator, and some of you might have seen his stuff. And we're just excited for what this future holds as Starship, to watch the development. And there's no official timeline, but Starship is being tested actively. Their next test could happen just in the next few weeks. And we're just waiting on this pipeline of development for when the rocket is prepared. And if there's one thing we've learned about spaceflight even to now, is everyone has high expectations and very, very optimistic timelines that very often get pushed way, way, way forward. And so we're waiting, NASA's waiting, and there's a whole lot of uncertainty to that. And they're making the impossible possible every day. But for us, we're just very excited for that development and that timeline of what's going to happen. Now, like I said, we're distributing that around the country, and it's given me a chance to begin to connect with people and think of all these stories intertwining. And what I liked, I didn't even do on purpose, is that idea of out there of what exists beyond your comfort zone and what's on that journey out there for you to go find. So I'm making films, and just that last thing is, Steve Jobs has this really cool thing about you don't connect dots in your life looking forward, but you connect them looking backwards. And so those constellations and the meaning you create, you have to live the experiences and look back to figure out what that all meant. And I'm excited to kind of continue doing that on this dearMoon journey and see what comes ahead. So yeah, I kind of just, I blasted through a lot of that stuff, but that's a lot of my path so far. I'm really excited to represent dearMoon. We've been to some of these Starship test launches, and I can tell you that the team at SpaceX is incredible and fueled on passion. And we're in this really, really cool new era. And so I'm going to pause. That was a very, very long spiel, but that's a bit of what I'm about. And I'd love to just talk with you guys, answer questions, have conversation, and anything that interests you from that story.
Brenden, thank you. That was fascinating. I'm not sure where to start with questions. Can you just it looked like there were 11 people in the picture that are in the crew. Is that correct? There's some of those people I assume are actual pilot and engineer people. And then the rest of you, you said there are 8 artist people. Can you go through the artists that are in the crew beside yourself?
Yeah, so there's 8 crew members. Steve Aoki, kind of American musician and DJ, Japanese American, top Korean musician from Korea, Dev Joshi, who's an actor in India, which is interesting too. Kareem Ilya, an Iranian-American photographer who's captured whales and volcanoes and very much like photo documentation. Rhiannon Adam, she's a photographer or photographic artist based in London that does really beautiful human portraiture. Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut who teaches rocket science and education on YouTube. And then Yemi AD, who's a Nigerian Czech choreographer and multidisciplinary artist. And it's interesting because globally there's a lot of representation and there's a lot of historic firsts. And what excites me is everyone has this different personality and kind of sense of humanity to their message that I think they'll bring. So we have 2 backup crew members as well. Caitlin Farrington, who's an Olympic snowboarder, which is an interesting kind of type of creativity. And then Miyu, who's a dancer from Japan. And then on top of that, we there's no official word or confirmation, but I assume there'll be a couple of actual SpaceX pilots on board and astronauts, although Starship's fully autonomous, so technically you don't need them to fly it, but I believe that's the plan. But
Okay, thank you. But what kind of limitations do you have as far as equipment? Because I mean, I know, from some of the pictures of yourself, I'm assuming you can't take your full gear. What are you allowed to take with you?
Yeah, so I wish I knew exactly what, but I know that something unique about Starship is it'll be the first ship that has private crew quarters. We'll actually each have our own little berth, and it's 3 times wider than the Saturn V in terms of crew space, the Saturn V being the rocket that took us to the moon. And so, like I said, it's made eventually for as many as 100 people to be able to do a jump in orbit. And that means that we'll have payloads most likely that are larger than any payload that's been able to be brought before. But even with tremendously larger payloads, doesn't mean we're getting into the space where I can bring some of those heavy camera rigs, and that's something still to figure out. I know that for like the Dragon capsule, they were each able to bring like a black duffel. They basically said, fit any personal items you want to that duffel. And I'd imagine we have quite a bit more. But what's interesting is that as a filmmaker, everything's finite. You're working off the finite energy and resources of this ship. It takes an incredible amount of propulsion to get even an ounce, especially a pound of equipment into orbit. And so my guess is we'll still have to be quite inventive with what we take. And I have a friend that is doing filmmaking for another major space mission with NASA that has those kind of traditional limitations. And she said they've even had iPhones in the conversation because it's this idea of what is a device rigged for very high quality that has internal storage and an internal battery where you're barely taking away energy from that ship that you're on. And so I wish I had a really cool specific answer, but what I can do, like I said, is frame it that we'll have quite a lot of payload compared to what's been able to be done. So,
okay, thank you.
I'm assuming you would have given a lot of thought to what you would end up doing when you're there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. So I think the first part of it that I've learned, especially lately, talking to other people who have been to space, been to orbit, is learning everything I possibly can in terms of my perspective that I can here on Earth before I go up there, So in terms of what I'm going to see geographically and what that experience is like looking down, whether it be back here on Earth or the craters of the moon, any knowledge I can onload into my brain that helps me immediately understand what I'm going to see is going to be important. And on top of it, I really want to make sure that for all of us artists, but I can speak the most to myself is the time I spend up there and what I'm creating is something that had to be created by going on the mission. And that it's worth that seed and that time. And so for me personally, like the mission of how to spend that time is creating this documentary and working on film projects while I'm up there. And my whole role is going to be balancing experiencing it myself, but even more so capturing others' reactions and their experiences and how they react when they're looking out the window and helping them with the art that they want to create. And so as a crew, we're beginning to think of that stuff, but we're also quite far out. But what I know is that each of us is going to be prioritizing that time deeply. And as a filmmaker too, like I've gotten to meet some really cool people and communities that I really love and that have been generous enough to work with me and share their stories. And I'm excited to find ways too to give shout outs back to them and bring up some really cool stuff that are mementos of them. So
John, hang on, John, Al had his hand raised earlier. So
I was going to ask if every artist had a mission or a project to do on that mission, and he sort of answered it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everyone is like gonna be at the peak of their, planning and creativity and figuring out what we can do. And there's no definite plans, but we all for sure want to collaborate together on, on work as well. And where the whole becomes greater than the sum of those parts.
So, John, taking your last answer to a question, if you have a maximum payload allowance, what type of system do you hope to bring with you? And if you have minimalist, will that be storyboard reporting on paper or in a little digital recorder, or what's your yin and yang of that, so to speak? And by the way, as Connecticut native yourself there, go Huskies. Sorry you went to NYU and not Wesleyan, but that's okay.
I support the Huskies and I support Connecticut sports as a school that had a lack of. It wasn't choosing a different team, but just not having another team to choose. So still Connecticut strong. Yeah, I think it's really tough. I think it's all about with the filmmaking. What is the threshold to be able to capture really quality, beautiful footage and audio that feels a little bit different than just like your regular iPhone and feels a little bit more cinematic and elevated. And because I want my camera to have its own feeling and its own perspective. And what's cool is I think SpaceX will almost definitely rig the whole interior with this craft with better cameras than we've seen be able to go up before. And so that's a really nice baseline. But I think I'm going to be most focused on like the perspectives of different lenses, depth of field, so letting it be kind of shallow and out of focus behind people and making it feel a little bit more like a documentary, but also mobility, where I want to be ready to capture those moments quickly and be able to get different angles and different shots and move around. And so anything that takes too much tinkering or is too difficult could get in the way of that. And I'm also interested in zero gravity. I have someone I've been meaning to talk to that does like camera gimbals in zero gravity and has these systems for how they work. And so in filmmaking, I think my whole thing is if you're working in a new medium, which I consider zero gravity a whole new medium itself, is not just how do you do your thing in that medium, but how do you create something that you could only create in zero gravity, where that tool becomes inseparable from the story you're telling, and that filmmaking had to be a part of it. And so I'll really be trying to dial it in as much as I can. And a very cool part of this process too has been getting a reason to meet new mentors who are telling us and telling me a little bit about what it's like. One is this guy, Richard Garriott. He's the president of the Explorers Club, and he's the only human on this earth, I think, that's been to the ISS, down to the Marianas Trench and the Titanic, and to the North and South Poles. And so he's a really cool adventurer and private explorer that has a very funny and nuanced perspective where he'll sit around a campfire and tell you for an hour what it's like to poop in space, that kind of guy. And then I have Nancy Conrad, whose late husband was Pete Conrad, who was a third moonwalker. And so she saw Pete through his life kind of go through a lot of the similar process and mental reckonings. And so anyway, we started this question with cameras, but that's kind of the perspective, is what will feel cinematic and what will feel a little bit different, very film-like. So we'll have to see.
Would you be satisfied with a mirrorless, Z system so you could do film and straight photography?
I would be, yeah. And I think that at the end of the day, I think it's about the story you're telling. And I'm not entirely picky. But I think that especially iPhone and drone technology, you see how small the cameras are on drones, and they're producing remarkable images that I have a feeling, especially by 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to be able to bring up something that's really, really powerful cinematically, which is cool. So,
yeah, don't expect to get signal back for your email.
That's at least my excuse. It's going to be the coolest email, bounce back of all time when you get the little email back that says I'm gone for 7 days. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Brenden, what in your conversations with Mr. Yusaku, did he express what his vision for this mission is?
Yeah, and maybe that's something I should have talked more at the beginning, but he's a really cool guy. I mean, he was a drummer of a punk band, entrepreneur. He founded this fashion aggregator called Zozo Town in Japan that is a website that hosts many, many fashion brands, and that's how he made a lot of his wealth. And then he became a big art collector. He's bought Basquiat paintings and some really, really renowned art. And so his whole background, I think, is through art, and his whole message that he loves is world peace, which is broad, but it's a meaningful message for someone to carry that's into this sort of thing, where the day that his company, his fashion company, went public on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, they like had people painted with their shirts off that said like world peace. And he's all about that spirit. And so dearMoon is cool because his vision behind it was that we've seen astronauts go to space and we've seen scientists, and some of them have created art, but we've never seen an entire civilian crew of artists undergo this journey. And so his whole vision was around artistry and creativity. And a lot of when we were being interviewed for the project, it was more about who we were than just the work that we've created, our portfolio or our status. And I thought that was really cool. And so I think he sees this as this new era of art, and they believe in us as artists to translate it in a meaningful way too. So,
Have you guys had any feelers for or done any training specifically to fly?
not yet, but training traditionally will happen within the year of the launch, you know, once there's been a launch date set. But we have been to SpaceX and gotten to talk to folks there, and we're excited. You know, a lot of what we can understand about training is through other similar civilian missions that have happened, and we know that it's going to be a very significant process. And our mission is way heavier than, for example, Blue Origin's, you know, missions of going up for 3 or 4 minutes where you hit 0G and it's, you know, you come back down. And those are still very significant and beautiful moments of people getting to space, but we're going up for 7 days. We're the first ones to do so. And so they're building that training regimen now. And I do think it'll be significant. So.
Hi, it's Jeff. Yeah, I really enjoyed your talk and the images and the whole idea. So just similar to the last question, I was going to ask what you had done so far, but certainly those short missions, you know, William Shatner went. I don't know, he's 90 or something. So it's like, all right, you know, there's a lot of people on here with some gray hair. There's still hope for us, but. You know, I assume that, like you said, for 7 days, both the physical and perhaps psychological demands. So could you speak a little bit to kind of the expectations there, either on the physical side with, you know, the training, what you anticipate, and I assume they probably did psychological profiling just to make sure the crew would kind of get along. So I'm just curious about those aspects.
Yeah, so I can't, for the psych stuff, I can't speak to the process as much as the results, you know, because I can only infer what they might be looking for in their selection process. What I think is cool is I think they really valued through that process of seeing us spend time together and seeing us do activities together. At one point during the interview process in person, the prospective candidates, we played ping pong and did this whole like, kind of physical sport challenge because I personally think it shows a lot about people and what they're about. And so I do think that they were putting us in situations where you could observe someone's emotional responses, their connectivity to other people, the ways that they interface, and the way we share our art. And so that was cool. And did a psych exam. Both my parents are clinical psychologists, so it's funny because I've, you know, had some insight into that idea for a long time. And then physically, I can't say, but I do know that they plan to push us to our limits. You know, they want to get us close to a breaking point, like psychologically, physically, and know our weaknesses, know our strengths. And so there's no surprises, you know, once we're up actually doing this whole thing. And kind of a fun fact is this is going to be the largest crew SpaceX has ever trained at once. And it might even be broken up into groups, you know, piecemeal over time, depending on availability. We don't have the info on that yet, but it is the largest crew they've trained at once, which is pretty cool. So
yeah, no, that's neat. And as far as like the filming and what you're going to tell for the story, I'd be real interested in all that stuff leading up to it. I think that would be, you know, really insightful and entertaining to kind of see how the testing each went through, and I assume some of the hard times, but how things worked out with the crew. Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, me and my girlfriend have been capturing a lot of these behind the scenes and test launches in Russia, and she was filming during some of the selection process before I was even selected. And so already ongoing. I spent a lot of time with crew members filming, so I'm really excited. I'm glad that you are too. You know, that's what it's all about, is getting people, you know, invested and excited in this stuff. So
Yeah, no, it's very cool. Thank you.
thank you.
As a writer, I find that I do better when I consider my audience. Who's your audience?
You know, for this one, it's kind of everyone for the film I want to make. I think that this dream, so similar to national parks, I didn't really mean to do this, but I kind of stumbled upon two big topics that a lot of people have a connection with, all ages, backgrounds, walks of life. And as I've traveled the country with this parks film, like just about everyone that comes up has some kind of really meaningful park story. The same way we all have that story of space and looking up as a kid, and what that's made us feel, you know, whether it's scientific or just based on awe and wonder or whatever it is. And God, time and time again, I'm traveling in other countries and see people in NASA sweatshirts. And I think, how cool is that? You know, that this like essentially government brand of engineering is like being worn by someone. They went and they bought that, and it makes them feel a certain way wearing it. And so I really think it's all ages and it's everyone. I think that people like getting towards their 20s and kind of figuring out that path of their life, and those questions of, am I doing the right thing, or is this worth it, or should I chase that dream? I think they'll be impacted hopefully by my story and the story of some of us artists, but it's a story that all of us share, because like for the youngest people, they're going to have more opportunities statistically to go to space, and see a whole new era in a way that none of us ever have before. And then people that are a bit older too, is it's getting statistically more and more likely. And for folks that were around and have seen the, you know, the first moon landing and the first moon launch and some of these eras, and the darker sides like the Challenger explosion, and we're having this whole new cycle of all that stuff happen again. And so I think no matter what, it's really meaningful. And whether communicating the story of like a DJ and a Korean pop musician and some of the eccentricities will land with everyone, we'll see. But I do think it's like a really human story, you know, of us all stumbling upon this kind of wild golden ticket and seeing what happens. So
Yeah, the Willy Wonka aspect is pretty cool.
yeah.
I wonder, are you very familiar with the works of Carl Sagan? Has seen any of his movies and videos?
Oh yeah, Carl Sagan's been a big influence, and I own Cosmos on DVD for some years, original Cosmos. So, and I actually, when I was at the Nat Geo channel, I bet they were producing. I was on one side of the office, the Nat Geo channel, and the other side actually produced their shows, and they were making Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and so I would walk over and just beg them to let me be a production assistant on Star Talk until finally they got me in for one season. And I had to crunch it hard. I'd have to work 8 a.m. to like 4 at the first job, and then go to the Museum of Natural History and be a production assistant till 4 a.m. on Star Talk, and sleep a few hours and get back to work. But especially at that age, 22, you know, and that was just a really cool dream. So yeah, in terms of my nerd, yeah, for sure. I love Carl Sagan, man. The Golden Record's so cool too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Earthling, I think is you know, and Earthlings in space. I mean, that's that environment taking us out of our womb, as it were, and
Out of our cradle.
with the emotional expressiveness of artists, it's a fascinating experiment. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys do.
Thank you. I am too, and I think what's like for us, it's just the first of so many more, where I fully believe that my grandkids won't even be surprised at the idea of this whole thing. There'll be thousands of people going up and doing lunar trips. It'll be like having, you know, grandpa having been on the first commercial plane that ever took off, where at the time it was this big deal, and then over time it becomes normalized. And so for me, a lot of the message that I've learned is, and I'm excited to try to share, is that it's not that we're just some, you know, unique or amazing group that gets to do this, is that everyone has the potential. And for me, like them saying, you know, you're deserving of this mission and you can do this has given me a lot of the confidence and a lot of the inspiration to go and chase it. And so I think there's this message that like we're all astronauts and our mission, like we're going to learn a lot. We'll have ups and we'll have downs, but it is just opening the door for what will be so many more people getting to share this perspective. And over the next 20, 30 years, like my God, the kinds of people we're going to see have the overview effect and have this experience is really, really cool. So tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
Anybody else have anything for Brenden? All right, Brenden. Well, I'm glad we were able to hook up. I mean, I was driving along. I think it's probably been about 2 years ago now.
Crazy.
And I heard you doing an interview on I don't even remember what radio station it was now. I think I only heard about 5 minutes of the interview and I didn't catch your name, but it sounded really strange. So I called the radio station actually, and I got your name.
No way.
And that's how I contacted you, you know, and I know we had a couple of, you know, delays in this, you know, this meeting here, but this is fascinating. And I know, you know, I'd like you to keep us informed on the progress here. If you don't mind, you know, you can send an email to me and I'll pass it on to the group. You know, and I know you're, you know, whenever things progress here, you know, I can tell you, you're not gonna be alone up there. You're gonna carry the hopes and the prayers of, you know, a couple of dozen, you know, old stargazers with you. So thank you. This was amazing. John,
just for your own outreach, Brenden, we had 20 participants here, both online or in person in the meeting.
That's awesome. No, and honestly, guys, I mean, thanks for being patient too. I know we had to reschedule because of unexpected health stuff last time, and I appreciate it. You know, this is just the very beginning of all this stuff, and I'm excited to keep you posted. Similarly, Chris, or you guys, you're welcome to reach out. Or if you have ideas, like you've been studying the stars and looking up at them and have a lot more knowledge than I do in a lot of things. And so anytime you think of something and want to forward an idea to me, I'm here for it. And, you know, it's a collective mission in that sense. So I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Lays are just like Starlink. You'll get used to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your documentary on the national parks, is that something that we can find somewhere?
Yeah, so right now we'll eventually distribute it more widely on a streaming link or somewhere where you guys can all see it. But we are going to do a big streaming or cross-country screening tour this summer. And so I'll send you guys the website in the chat, the Zoom chat. It's just outthere.film, not outthere.com. You just type in outthere.film and there's a screenings page. So you can enter your name for screening info and all that stuff. I'm on social media too, if it's anyone's thing. Instagram, Brenden Film. My full name, Brenden Hall. LinkedIn, Facebook. And yeah, the film too is called Out There, a National Park Story. And so down the line, if you ever Google Out There National Park Story and you're wondering what happened, I'm sure it'll come up. So
Is that something you'd want us to include in the YouTube link description?
Sure, be happy to. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Always ask permission first.
Yeah. And I had a chance to ping through the presentation beforehand, and there's nothing in there that you can't share on YouTube, which is good. So you can let it ride. No editing needed.
All right, thank you. You're getting the Spock salute there. All right, thank you so much, Brenden. We're gonna go to the rest of the meeting now. You're welcome to hang around, or it's you know, generally a business meeting from this point on. So
yeah, I would. I got to prepare for the screening tomorrow, but thank you guys and enjoy the meeting. I'll talk to you soon.